I turned you into a dog. Did you listen to my poem?
This can't be happening.
It's already happened. You are a dog now. And you're gonna stay a dog until you do 100 good deeds. And the only person who will hear you speak is the last kid you terrorized. Ironic.
Faster than a speeding bullet. More powerful than a locomotive. Able to leap tall buildings at a single bound. Look, up in the sky, it's a bird.
It's a plane.
It's Superman. Yes, it's Superman, strange visitor from another planet who came to Earth with powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men. Superman, who can change the course of mighty rivers, bend steel in his bare hands, and who, disguised as Clark Kent, mild-mannered reporter for a great metropolitan newspaper, fights a never-ending battle for truth, justice, and the American way.
This video is brought to you by Patreon. Patreon! Up, up, and away! Once again, we find ourselves in the realm of Nick at Night shows on daytime Nickelodeon, when the channel decided some classic baby boomer television had value with the teenage Gen X and youngster millennial demographics. Sometimes the reason for this is obtuse, but just as often, it's pretty obvious. Everybody knows who Superman is. The first big comic book superhero, the Man of Steel has never stopped being relevant since his premiere in print in 1938. And that was no less true in 1991. It was only 4 years out since the most recent, and ultimately last, Christopher Reeves Superman movie, Superman 4: The Quest for Peace, which was critically panned but still made a profit. There was a 1988 animated Superman series produced by Ruby Spears that aired on CBS. A new comic series, Superman, the Man of Steel, premiered in July of 1991, which was published alongside the regular Superman series, Adventures of Superman Action Comics. DC sold roughly 500,000 issues of Superman every month. Around this time, Clark Kent and Lois Lane got engaged, with Lois finally learning that Kent was Superman, a storyline that received some publicity. The Hyde Collection Art Museum in Glens Falls, New York held a Superman art exhibit in January of 1991. The city of Metropolis, Illinois held its 13th annual Superman celebration in June of 1991, and a Superman exhibit opened at the Lynn County Historical Museum in Cedar Rapids, Iowa in September of 1991. Oh, and the Crash Test Dummies released their very first single that year, Superman Song, which put that band on the map.
Superman never made any money saving the world from Solomon Grundy.
And then there was the Superboy show, starring Gerard Christopher. It ended its third season and began its fourth in 1991, and is particularly relevant in all of this as it was filmed at Universal Studios Florida. So naturally there was some cross-promotion with the rise of Nickelodeon Studios in 1990.
Hi.
Hi. Hi, how are you?
Do your tights itch? My friend Melody's here a little bit nervous. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the show?
Well, they do. It's usually just when I can't scratch, but...
Superman wasn't the biggest superhero around in 1991. Spider-Man was outselling him in the comic book stores and Batman had taken over the movies, but he was still a popular, mainstream character. And when the opportunity arose for Nickelodeon to air some Superman themselves, of course they took it. Premiering first on Nick at Night on September 20th and then on daytime Nickelodeon on October 5th, this is Adventures of Superman.
Nickelodeon knows it's tough getting through the week, but when you're hung up, tied up, and ready to blow at any second, now you can call on Superman. He's on your side for 2 thrilling adventures every Saturday in the ongoing fight against the big, the mean, and the way uncool. There to do good when you need him bad. It's Superman, the one and only Man of Steel, on the one and only network for you. Saturdays at 10, 9 Central on Nickelodeon.
You've probably heard this story 1,000 times by now. Far, far away, there was a planet called Krypton, and unbeknownst to its citizens, the planet was doomed. days away from destroying itself. The only one to realize this was the Kryptonian Jor-El, and unable to save his world, he did the next best thing, saving his only son. Loaded up in a little rocket, the baby Kryptonian escaped Krypton in the nick of time, the space vessel making its way to Earth. There it was discovered by a loving married couple, the Kents, who adopted the space infant, naming him Clark. It soon became clear that Clark held great abilities beyond that of mortal man, immense strength, invulnerability to harm, the ability to look through solid objects. And eventually, Clark even learned how to fly. Clark grew up and moved to the city of Metropolis, deciding to live a double life. Clark Kent, reporter for the city's major newspaper, The Daily Planet, and Superman, Earth's protector against evil, living by the standards of truth, justice, and the American way. As Clark Kent, he goes about his day looking for the hottest scoop, often stories on local crime organizations, of which Metropolis has many. His partner in journalism is Lois Lane, played initially by Phyllis Coates, a spitfire reporter that, against the wishes of her friends and co-workers, jumps feet first into danger to get to the bottom of her story.
There's a story behind this tapestry, and I'm going to get it.
Why not let Kent handle this?
Oh, no. Now that Professor Lavera's dead, it's my tapestry and my story.
Then there's Jimmy Olsen, played by Jack Larson, another Daily Planet employee, though a lot less confident and a lot more bumbling than Clark and Lois. Still, when things get serious, Jimmy will do his best to help his friends.
Jim, why did you go out there?
Gosh, I was only trying to save Miss Lane. And besides, I knew the dynamite that guy had strapped to him was phony.
You knew it was phony.
How, Jim?
Well, because that first stick of dynamite he showed us said on it was made by the Apex Powder Company. But when I looked for the Apex Powder Company in the phone book, it wasn't even listed.
But the first stick did explode, remember?
And the fact that a company isn't in the Metropolis phone book doesn't mean that it isn't in some other city.
Oh.
Their boss is Perry White, played by John Hamilton, a boisterous and eager to anger newspaper editor, often flustered as his key reporters go off on their crazy adventures. And sometimes he gets to go along on the adventures himself.
I better get out there.
Where?
The Washington Limited. If this is on the level, it's a whale of a story. I'll see you later, Chief.
Kent, come back here! Kent! Kent, that train's halfway to Washington by now. Come back here. How are you going to... Great Caesar's ghost! Is everybody around here gone crazy?
Of course, what none of them know is that Clark Kent is actually Superman. He prefers to keep his identity secret. The result is Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, and Perry White thinking that Clark is a little cowardly, a little weaselly, as he seems to run away from danger. What they don't know is that he's simply changing into his costume, ready to wreck the plans of every crook in Metropolis. Nobody can stop Superman.
Jimmy, are you all right?
Yeah, I guess so. My legs are a little weak, that's all.
That was a close one.
And if it hadn't been for Superman, why... How is it you always manage to show up at the right time?
That's my job, Miss Lane.
And behind that confident smile was the actor George Reeves. Born George Brewer on January 5th, 1914, George Reeves had gotten his big film break in acting playing one of Scarlett O'Hara's suitors in the 1939 hit film Gone with the Wind. Sadly, that didn't translate into a very fruitful career, Reeves being stuck in secondary parts in B-movies, only taking a break to make training films in the U.S. Armed Forces during World War II. Reeves was offered the role of Superman in 1951, beating out at least 200 other applicants. But Reeves was hesitant. Television was new and had early on developed a reputation of being a lesser art form than film. But eventually he accepted, and Superman would make George Reeves a household presence, if not exactly a household name. While this was Superman's first foray into television, it was far from his first adaptation to a new medium. The character was created by science fiction writer Jerry Siegel and illustrator Joe Shuster. Superman made his premiere in print in Action Comics #1, dated June 1938. The idea of a superior man with supernatural powers was something the two had been workshopping as early as 1932, beginning as an immoral villain given powers by mad science, and then through years of drafts, failed pitches, and brainstorming sessions, the idea evolved into a benevolent protector from another world. The character was an immediate hit. The publishers themselves didn't quite realize the power of Superman until they learned that at the newsstand, people were asking not for Action Comics, but for that magazine with Superman in it. Detective Comics Incorporated's Action Comics, which had started as an anthology series, quickly pivoted to all Superman all the time, and soon superhero stories dominated the comic book market. A Superman newspaper comic strip began the next year, and then on February 12, 1940, Superman was brought to the world of radio.
Now for Hagen. It's just time to stop him before midnight. Up, and away!
Sponsored by Kellogg's, the Adventures of Superman radio show actually did a lot to define Superman's world, almost as much as the comics. It was the radio show that introduced the characters of Jimmy Olsen and Perry White, and it's where kryptonite, Superman's famous weakness, comes from. The legend goes that kryptonite was introduced to put Superman on bed rest and allow his actor, Bud Collyer, the chance to go on vacation. That's probably not true, but it's one of those fun old show business stories that have persisted over the decades. The radio show's opening became iconic, following Superman throughout the 20th century.
Faster than an airplane, more powerful than a locomotive, impervious to bullets.
Up in the sky, look, it's a bird, it's a plane,
It's Superman! And now, Superman.
Beginning in 1941, Fleischer Studios produced animated Superman shorts, distributed theatrically by Paramount Pictures. And if you haven't seen them, they are beautiful. High-quality animation mixed with Fleischer's signature rotoscoping that really brings Superman and his abilities to life. It was from these shorts that Superman gained the ability to fly. In the first batch of comics, he merely leaped great distances. But that didn't look nearly as good in animation, so Superman leveled up.
It's Superman!
The first live-action Superman production would come with Columbia Pictures' Superman serials, 1948's Superman and 1950's Atom Man vs. Superman, with Kirk Alyn playing the titular role and actress Noelle Neal playing Lois Lane. Taking note from the Fleischer shorts, the serial opted for animation for showing off Superman's powers of flight and invulnerability. I bring up these three Superman adaptations because, in their own ways, they each feed into the creation and creative decisions of the Adventures of Superman television show. One common thread through all of this was Whitney Ellsworth, an editorial director for Detective Comics, who had become something of a liaison between the comic book publisher and studios adapting their work. DC Comics' Hollywood guy. Along with working on the 1940s Batman serials, Ellsworth was a story consultant for both the early Fleischer cartoons and the first Columbia serial, and he was a writer for several radio show adventures. It was while working on the radio show that Ellsworth met producer Robert Maxwell, whom longtime Knacks viewers may remember as the man who brought Lassie to television. Before that, however, he worked in adventure and horror radio shows, and The Adventures of Superman was his first big hit. The two creatives hit it off and began a working partnership that would follow them into the 1950s. And then television arrived, and in a very short amount of time, it would kill radio shows, animated theatrical shorts, and theatrical serials. If Superman media outside of the comics was going to continue, it would have to pivot to television. and Detective Comics, now known as National Comics Publications following a few mergers, decided, hey, instead of handing off the IP to another studio, maybe we should do it ourselves. However, the comic book publisher didn't exactly have television money, so they first opted to make a movie. Well, at 58 minutes, you probably wouldn't call it a movie today, but rather a double-length pilot that happened to air in movie theaters. Superman and the Mole Men was produced by National Comics and distributed by B-movie house Lippert Pictures. Whitney Ellsworth and Robert Maxwell co-wrote the screenplay under the pen name Richard Fielding, and George Reeves was cast as the new face of Superman. Superman and the Mole Men tells the story of an oil town made famous by digging the world's deepest oil well. Unfortunately, that means they've dug into a subterranean civilization, who send some of their people out to find out what the heck is going on. The town reacts with disproportionate fear and anger, and send a mob to chase the little guys around. It's up to Superman to cool things down.
Now I'm going to give you one last chance to stop acting like Nazi stormtroopers.
Who are you to tell us what to do?
All I'm telling you is that little creature in there has as much right to live as you do. Don't forget, you invaded his world. You sank a pipe 6 miles into the ground. And when he climbed up, you set dogs on him, shot him.
Get inside and stay away from the front of the building.
Whoever fired that shot came close to killing Miss Lane. Obviously, none of you can be trusted with guns. So I'm going to take them away from you.
Superman and the Mole Men is a fantastic start to this new version of the character. George Reeves' Superman being introduced not with violence against a terrible foe, but a call for tolerance and understanding in the face of mob hysteria, a needed message in post-war America. His power is used to disarm the violent and act as a human shield. Superman and the Mole Men, the first theatrical film of any DC Comics character, premiered in theaters on November 6, 1951, with production of the television show beginning a few months prior. However, it would take a whole year for the show to actually reach television sets. The show needed a sponsor, and it took National Comics a while to dig one up. But eventually things settled with good old reliable Kellogg's, the same sponsor of the radio show.
Great Caesar's ghost. What's holding him up? You know I can't work without a good breakfast.
Chief, Jimmy's bringing a box of Kellogg's Sugar Smacks.
All the more reason for hurrying. Confound it, that boy knows I like those new Sugar Smacks.
And he knows I do, too. And that's a cinch.
Well, here I am. Young man, if you spill those new Sugar Smacks, you're fired.
In fact, the TV show could be seen as kind of an unofficial continuation of the radio show. Not of any of the plots from the show, but the radio show ended in 1951, the same year Superman and the Mole Men hit theaters. Both shows have the same name, the same sponsor, the same producer, and Robert Maxwell. Whitney Ellsworth wrote for both programs. It even has the same iconic opening monologue. On the live action side of things, the show brought on director Tommy Carr, who had directed the original Kirk Allen serial. He would end up directing the bulk of the show's first 2 seasons. We had more say with Superman on television for the simple reason that we weren't restricted to animation as we were to our serial. Our TV work looked alive. The writing was better on television, the acting was better too. It was a more intimate medium. Sure, the serial was more violent than the television series. That was their bread and butter then, the audience loved that. But the TV show was shot better in every way. Indeed, the television show couldn't rely on animation for their special effects, instead opting for an early matte effect. Sure, it looks primitive in this digital footage, but you have to remember that this would have been airing on a fuzzy 16-inch cathode ray tube television screen at 480 horizontal lines. That kind of low fidelity does a lot to cover up the seams of older special effects. For moments of takeoff, the show initially favored stunt doubles and wiring rigs, but early on springboards were introduced. This helped define the physicality of George Reeves' Superman, the way he charges up and does a double leap into flying, and that has a lot of power behind it. It looks really good. Now, the animated Fleischer cartoons had less impact on Adventures of Superman than the radio show or the serials, with Ellsworth being the only connection between the two productions, but I think a lot of the sensibilities of the animated shorts inspired those of the television show, especially in the way that Clark Kent carries himself. the way he slips into a closet to change into Superman, and especially the way many of the cartoons ended with Clark and Lois at the Daily Planet talking about Superman, with Clark giving a knowing look at the audience, something the TV show famously adopted.
Congratulations, Lois. That was a great scoop.
Yes, Chief, thanks to Superman.
But, Monsieur Kent, how did you get back here so quickly?
I flew.
Adventures of Superman was, in many ways, the accumulation of Superman media up to that point. However, the budgetary and special effects limitations of 1950s television dictated what kind of stories the show could tell. And, well, when Adventures of Superman premiered in syndication on September 19, 1952, this was the current comic book issue. Superman fighting a space dragon. Yeah, Adventures of Superman was not going to reflect the contemporary version of Superman seen in the comic books. In fact, it would take very few things from the comics besides Superman and his origins, Lois Lane, and the rest of the Daily Planet staff. Not a single classic comic book villain shows up. Granted, the show predates characters like Brainiac, Bizarro, or the Parasite, but Lex Luthor would have been doable, and he's a complete no-show, as is the Ultra Humanite and the Toyman. Mr. Mxyzptlk would have required some special effects, but you can totally imagine how a 50s television show would have handled him. Instead, the show harkens back to the first handful of issues of the comics, when Superman was almost exclusively taking on organized crime. The first couple of seasons consist basically of film noir stories, tales of mafia violence and international espionage and Scooby-Doo style con artists. A crime syndicate uses a ventriloquist act to send coded messages about armored car hijackings. A girl from Eastern Europe escapes to Metropolis, pursued by communist spies who want to steal a secret formula in her possession. A woman claims to have the power to predict the deaths of powerful men and use it as pretense to have them kidnapped. And then Superman shows up. He shrugs off some bullets, bonks the bad guys on the head, and that's that.
Verfluchter Übermensch!
Now, what have you done with Jim Olsen?
One of my favorite early episodes is Season 1, Episode 6, Night of Terror, in which Lois Lane checks into a motel, only to discover that some human trafficking thugs have taken over the property. Kidnapped, Lois has to find a way to reach out for help, sneaking to a nearby phone booth. And it's really tense. And then Superman shows up and saves the day. There's a sort of genre invasion going on. Noir crime stories are grim, cynical, violent, morally ambiguous. The good guys don't always win. Women tend to get hurt. Superman here is effectively invading these kind of stories and rendering them null and void. He's crashing into a different genre from his own and changing the narrative. The good guys do win. Crime doesn't pay. Lois Lane always survives. Superman takes what's dark and adult and serious and turns it into a child-friendly adventure, where the bad guys are just spooky shadows on the wall whenever Superman's around. There is something appealing to this idea, but it does have its drawbacks. Because Superman can stop the bad guys so easily, he needs to be sidelined for most of the story, distracted by something else, or simply unaware that bad things are happening until the very last minute. In order to make their Superman show work, they had to make sure Superman was in it as little as possible. Occasionally, the show would throw in a more science fiction-y plot with a mind control device or a robot, but none of this slows Superman down. Like, here's the entire fight against the aforementioned robot, from beginning to end.
It's Superman!
Well, do something!
Superman is such a tricky character to write for. Always has been, always will be. The show finally introduced Kryptonite in Season 2, Episode 6, The Defeat of Superman. And after 32 episodes, Superman was finally allowed to get put on the ropes every once in a while.
It's heavy. No, see?
Jimmy, get it out of here.
Yeah.
Superman.
I'll get rid of it. He'll be all right.
Oh, Jimmy, get that thing out of here.
I'll get rid of it. It'll be a lead pipe cinch.
In my opinion, this was sorely needed to let Superman be more involved throughout the episode, in order to present real stakes and allow characters like Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen to be active in saving the day. Robert Maxwell left the series after Season 1, and Whitney Ellsworth took over as producer for the rest of the show's run. Phyllis Coates also left after Season 1 due to commitments to other projects, and the role of Lois Lane was given to Noelle Neal, who had played the character in the serials. Neal is fine, but in my opinion, a step down from Coates, trading in the Spitfire energy for a more meek and soft-spoken performance.
Clark, I want you to know I think that's one of the bravest things I've ever seen.
You mean it's something you'd only expect Superman to do?
Well, yes.
A couple more episodes worth highlighting. Season 2, Episode 12, Panic in the Sky, sees an asteroid hurtling towards Earth. The episode opening with the citizens of Metropolis waiting to see if they'll live to see another day. It's hands down the biggest threat Superman ever takes on in the series, and one of the few times Superman's power levels seem to match those of his contemporary comic book counterpart. It's the biggest special effects extravaganza of 1953. Then there's the final episode of Season 2, Around the World with Superman, in which Superman holds a contest to fly one lucky child around the world. However, the girl who submitted the winning letter is blind, and doesn't actually believe in Superman, thinking him just one of those silly things adults make up like Santa Claus. But Superman, he looks out for children more than anyone else, and he takes the time to talk with the girl and have them understand each other.
All right, now I'm clear in here in the other room. Now you whisper something and I'll bet you I can hear every word you say. Now go on.
I want my daddy back home again.
Anne, what you whispered was so private, I don't even think you wanted me to hear it. But what you said was...
How did you know what I said?
Oh, because I'm Superman, and somehow I think you've always believed in me all this time, haven't you?
It's a moving bit of television. It gets a little sugary sweet after Superman ends up using his powers to cure the girl's blindness, something Superman as Jesus metaphor something, but George Reeves is so tender in this episode. It almost makes you believe in Superman yourself. You know, sometimes it's not about stopping the bad guys or saving the world. Sometimes it's about making one person's life that much better. The series went to color beginning in Season 3 in 1954, the same year the first mass-produced color television, the RCA CT100, entered the market. With color, the show lost a lot of its film noir edge and opted for goofier stories. The very first episode of Season 3 seeing our heroes accidentally sent thousands of years into the past and interacting with cavemen.
This is really going to be a home-cooked meal tonight.
Cave-cooked, you mean?
There's a story where Perry White is haunted by the ghost of Julius Caesar. There's an episode where Jimmy Olsen is confused for a foreign prince. There's an episode where Superman gets flash frozen by some crooks. And then there's Season 3, Episode 11, Flight to the North, which is... Okay, how do I explain this? So, Chuck Connors is playing this guy, and his real legal name is Sylvester J. Superman. and he's walking around Metropolis with a donkey, and he finds a classified ad in the paper for someone named Marjorie asking Superman for help. It turns out that Marjorie wants Superman to fly a lemon meringue pie to Alaska, where her fiancé is stationed, because it would take weeks or even months for the Postal Service to get it there, and then it would go bad. Meanwhile, two gangsters get into an argument over who makes the best lemon meringue pie. Marjorie, whom one of the gangsters used to go to school with, or the other gangster's aunt. However, Marjorie won't make a lemon meringue pie for the gangsters because...
I promised Steve before he went away that I wouldn't bake lemon meringue pies for anybody but him.
Listen, kid, I want this pie, see?
So Sylvester J. Superman goes all the way to Alaska to deliver the pie, and then the gangster shows up, having chased Sylvester J. Superman so he can steal the lemon meringue pie, and then the actual Superman shows up, and... Do you remember when Superman was taking on, like, smuggling rings? The show pivoted hard into goofier, more child-friendly Saturday morning stories. Some of them leaned into a patriotic bent, praising the importance of American democracy, and once the U.S. Treasury Department commissioned a short film from the production, Stamp Day for Superman, about the school-saving stamp program.
There can only be one Superman, of course. Did you ever think about some of the super things that you can do for yourself? Well, like saving up the money for your own vacation, or for that new bike that you wanted so much. Well, all you have to do is just put away part of your allowance or your odd job money and put it in United States savings stamps at school.
Adventures of Superman was a huge hit with children, to the point of worry that some kids might try to replicate Superman's behavior. There was concern that young people may pretend to be Superman and jump off their roofs, which tragically has happened a few times over the decades, but not while the show was in production. Still, multiple episodes made efforts to make it clear that Superman, and only Superman, can do what he does.
Gee, could you teach me to do that?
Mommy, there's something I want you to remember. No one, but no one can do the things that Superman does, and that goes especially for flying.
There is one infamous story where George Reeves was attending an event in character as Superman, and a child walked up to him with a loaded pistol, wanting to see if the bullets bounced off him. Reeves talked the child down, saying, sure, Superman wouldn't get hurt, but the bullets might ricochet and hit some innocent bystanders. The validity of this incident is in question, but I can confirm Reeves discussing times of children punching him in the eye or kicking him in the shins to see if he would flinch. This roughhousing from his audience fed into his contract negotiations, which in 1954 he made public. He had been making $5,000 a week, which wasn't bad, about $54,000 today, but that was only for the 8 weeks the show was in production every year. Reeves struggled to find work outside of the show, his image so thoroughly owned by the Superman character, and attempts to start his own production company failed to get off the ground. Reeves tried to keep busy with talk show appearances, and he played himself, sort of, in an episode of I Love Lucy.
Of all the crazy things that you've done in the 15 years that we've been married,
Ricardo, do you mean to say that you've been married to her for 15 years?
Yeah, 15 years.
And they call me Superman.
The last thing George Reeves did that wasn't Superman related was the 1956 Disney Western Westward Ho! The Wagons, which by all accounts he only really got because he was friends with producer Bill Walsh, and he had to wear a beard and age makeup to be less visually recognizable as the guy who plays Superman. Reeves then tried to expand his portfolio by directing what would end up being the final 3 episodes of the television show. Adventures of Superman went for a total of 6 seasons, 104 episodes overall, the final new episode airing on April 28, 1958. There was intent to move forward with a 7th and even 8th season, but things fell apart pretty quickly. John Hamilton died of heart failure on October 15, 1958, at the age of 71. In the tradition of Lois Lane, Pierre Watkin, the actor who played Perry White in the serials, was cast as Hamilton's replacement. Less replaceable was George Reeves. On June 16, 1959, George Reeves was found dead in his bedroom from a gunshot wound to the head. He was 45. The Los Angeles Police Department ruled the death a suicide, and in my opinion, I think that's an accurate assessment. But a number of conspiracy theories have cropped up over the decades, claiming that Reeves was murdered, perhaps by someone in organized crime, perhaps by his fiancée. In most ways, George Reeves' death has eclipsed his life. Several books have been written on the subject. There was a 2006 film called Hollywoodland about it, with Ben Affleck playing Reeves. But I'm not going to dive too deeply into the conspiracies here. One, they're depressing, and two, I think wallowing in all of this takes away from the work the man did. I don't know how Reeves truly felt about being Superman, or how his typecasting in the role had affected his mental health. None of us ever will. I do know that he was a good Superman, stoic and charming and with a controlled strength, a man who took how children perceived him very seriously. The scripts got pretty goofy, but Reeves never stopped giving 100% to the role. Without its star, Adventures of Superman ended production. Whitney Ellsworth made a few attempts at making other Superman shows, including a possible Jimmy Olsen spin-off, a Superboy prequel show, and The Adventures of Super Pup.
I hope this works out all right. I hope. 2 and 2 makes 4. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Wow.
I guess the world just wasn't ready for little people actors in dog costumes acting out old Superman scripts, because none of these projects took off. Oh sure, many other Superman shows and cartoons and movies would follow, but Ellsworth's lineage ends here. Adventures of Superman would have sporadic syndicated reruns over the next few decades. The show remained under the ownership of DC Comics, which was acquired by Kinney National in 1967. Kinney then acquired Warner Bros. 7 Arts in 1970, and in 1972 spun off the entertainment branches into Warner Communications, the company that created Nickelodeon. Which means that in its earliest days, Nickelodeon could have aired Adventures of Superman without paying a penny, in the same way they could use DC Comics for their video comics show. However, under the leadership of Cy Snyder, Nickelodeon had little interest in violent Saturday morning content like that. Nickelflix, a show airing theatrical adventure serials, was the closest show to Adventures of Superman in terms of content, and Nickelflix holds the distinction of being the first Nickelodeon show to be cancelled. However, Viacom-era Nickelodeon felt it worth paying Warner the syndication fees, just as they were paying for Looney Tunes. Nick at Night kicked off its airing of the show on September 20th with a massive Superman weekend marathon that included the show, the Superman and the Mole Man movie, and even the serials and Flesher cartoons.
It's Nick at Night's Metropolis Mailbag.
Dear Nick at Night, aha! In the episode Bully of Dry Gulch, Superman uses his heat vision through Clark's glasses? Impossible! Heat vision would melt any glass. Gotcha! Sincerely, Barney Welshmertz.
Sorry, Barney, but Clark's specs were ground from the Kryptonian glass windows that were on the rocket that carried him to Earth. They can take the heat. It's no mistake to watch The Adventures of Superman every weeknight on Nick at Night.
Its airing on daytime Nickelodeon was less of an event. Adventures of Superman aired twice on Saturdays at 10 and 10:30 in the morning, eventually grabbing the same time slot on Sunday a few months later. For a short time, Nickelodeon had this thing about airing double episodes on Saturday mornings. You would have 2 episodes of Inspector Gadget, then 2 episodes of Superman, then 2 episodes of F-Troop, and then 2 episodes of Dennis the Menace, and then 2 episodes of Flipper, before passing things off to special delivery. And the show aired on the channel for longer than you'd guess, nearly a year, the final daytime broadcast being on August 29th, 1992. I can't speak for how successful it was for the channel, but anecdotal accounts seem to suggest it had its fans. Personally, I only caught it every once in a while, but Saturday mornings were for Saturday morning cartoons, and on Sundays, well, I would have been in church. As usual, Nick at Night aired it for quite a bit longer, up until September 3rd, 1995. Adventures of Superman has maintained a pretty healthy relationship with home viewing. Much of the series was released on VHS in the mid-90s, and the entire series hit DVD in 2006, just in time for Superman's return to the big screen with, Superman Returns. At the time of this recording, you can get all the episodes digitally on Amazon Prime. Not on Max, though. Nobody hates Warner Brothers' back catalog more than Warner Brothers. Much of the cast were long-lived, making cameos in other Superman productions and visiting the convention scene. In fact, Phyllis Coates, the first Lois Lane and the last surviving main cast member, passed away while I was writing this script, on October 11, 2023, at the age of 96. The George Reeves incarnation of Superman made a controversial cameo in 2023's The Flash, bringing up discussions on the ethics of digitally recreating deceased actors. Personally, I hate it. I hate it here, I hate it when they did it in Star Wars, I hate it when they did it in Ghostbusters. Just corpses on strings, it's so morbid. And it's especially hard to see it with George Reeves, a man who struggled to find his place in show business, and when he did, it sucked him in like a tar pit, unable to escape, even now, 70-odd years later. For what it's worth, Adventures of Superman is a fine show. Not my favorite incarnation of the franchise. It's a little weird, a little uneven, with many of the classic narrative problems that come with Superman stories. But however he might have felt about it, George Reeves was a damn good Superman. One that tried to be moral and kind, and one that always had time for children. Not a modern Superman, but a timeless one.
Nick, 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 Nickelodeon. Nick, 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 Nickelodeon.
Next time, we finish off our trilogy of Nick at Night crossover shows with one that's like 80% Indian jokes. Spoiler warning, this one sucks. Today's research shout-out goes to Superman, Serial to Serial by Gary Grossman. There are many books on the general history of Superman. There are many books on the conspiracies around George Reeves' untimely death. But this 1976 book is the only one focused on the actual production of Adventures of Superman itself, with lots of cast and crew interviews and production photos. Thank you all for watching. If you like to support Knacks and other Pop Arena projects, consider contributing to my Patreon. Every dollar goes to production values, research materials, and fiber supplements. My guts are having a rough time. If you like seeing me cover these older shows, a reminder that when my Patreon goes up to $1,000 a video, I'll begin a new series, Knacks at Night. You can also support the channel by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, hitting that bell icon for notifications, following me on social media, sending a one-time donation through PayPal or Coffee, and sharing Knacks with all your friends. I'll see you next time, and remember, Black Lives Matter.